statement. Some of you have prepared slides, which I will be sharing. And in that input statement, I've asked them to tell us in a very, very, very short input what's the challenge or the biggest challenge of an energy transition or just energy transition in your country, because in the audience we have people from very different places in the world who might not be acquainted with the specific countries. So we'll start with that short overview, and then we'll move to some questions looking at the recent developments with the energy crisis and what does it mean for the different countries. And after that, if we have time, and I'm hopeful that it will keep time and we'll have time for that, we'll receive some questions from the audience. So without further ado, I'm gonna introduce our first speaker. I hope I don't pronounce your name wrong, because I don't speak French or Arabic, so it's difficult for me. But Khadija Shakrui, Sarah, can you probably better if you repeat your name yourself, who is a doctoral candidate here at TU Berlin, but has several years of experience in different African countries, actually, but specifically on Algeria, and has been researching on renewable energy in Algeria. And she's going to tell us a little bit about this. So I'm going to give the floor directly to you. And I can change the slides. You need to say continue. Thank you.
So hello everyone, virtual and in person. So my name actually is Khadija, and my family name is Sakhrawi, like in an Arabic version. Yeah. So talking about the energy transformation trends, especially in more focus on the African continent, I will take you through the Maghreb region, and more specifically Algeria as a case study. So yeah, please, the next slide. Yeah. So in terms of area, Algeria is one of the biggest countries in the continent, and then which make her, for the time being, since we have a lot of fossil fuels resources, it's our main economy. So the country, its main income come from fossil fuels, with 95% of incomes. So which means that if there is a drop down of prices of oil and gas, the whole economy will drop down. From the other side, Algeria also ranks as the 11 in the whole world with the proven natural gas resources. Plus for that, we have also ranked with the 16th place when it comes to oil resources, which means we have also huge resources when it comes to fossil fuels. Yeah, please the other side. Good. Yeah, to go more specifically to our topic today, which is the sustainable development, more precisely SDG number 7. When it comes to SDG number 7, Algeria, for the sub-target 7.1, energy access, has already achieved that goal. So we have 100% energy access, whether for the urban or the rural area. However, from the other side, which is unfortunate, it's almost 0% when it comes to the whole share of the energy mix of renewable energy. Which make a huge question here between the two factors or the two numbers. We have the whole access, and then the other side, no relation with environment, CO2 emission, renewable energy, only fossil fuels. Yeah, so take it up from there. Our two neighbors, yeah, please, the next slide. Yeah, thank you. The other two neighbors, if we talk about the Maghreb region, to just give you an idea about them, when it comes to Morocco, both Morocco and Tunisia, all of them also, they have exceeded 100% of energy access. However, for the share of renewable energy, Tunisia is making efforts more than the other two countries, with a percentage of 12.2% of share of renewable energy. And then comes Morocco with 10.7. However, for Algeria, we're still not yet reached out to that level. So for my research today, please the next slide. Good. So recently, the Algerian government decided to create another ministry under the name of energy transition. Why? Because now they think more to adopt renewable energy, especially with the last crisis of COVID-19. We saw a lot of things has been happened that there's more specifically the drop down prices of oil and gas. So now the government stand up and said, yeah, we need to have more renewable energy share in our energy mix. And we don't need to just rely on the in our economy or on fossil fuels income. Yeah. So from other side, the renewable energy potential of the country has been detected that we have almost 3,000 kilowatts per hour when it comes to solar radiation, and more when you go to south, more the radiation will go more. So we have here, let us say, a treasure of renewable energy in the whole continent. Another thing, within the establishment of the new ministry, the government decided to create a plan. In this plan, they precised a level, or let us say percentage of 25% of share of renewable energy by the end of 2030. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then after that, please the next slide. Yeah. Thank you. So after the establishment of this new ministry, they came up with another government-owned society, so let us say company, which is owned by the government, and then in the same time, it's a share between the two, both central companies of oil and gas in the country. So the government make them work in the field of renewable energy, and then in the same time they are doing or developing fossil fuels. So they're trying to force the same power that we have, or the same market holder that we have, and just shift them toward the adaptation of renewable energy. And then after that, on March 2020, they launched it on the new project, which is 1,000 installation of 1,000 megawatts of solar panels in the whole country, with more precise 11 regions, which are more into the south of the country. Why? Because we have, as I mentioned, a huge potential there of solar radiation. Yeah. And then after that, they also decided to explore with the German partnership with hydrogen to see if that will work also as a case study. And also they have made it recently a partnership with Horizon Europe calls with other projects and other partners in Europe. For example, we have a project which is already working on with TU Berlin as a partner. This project is about micro grids in the agriculture sector in Algeria and Morocco. So this was as a small example of the government, what they are doing and they are implementing in the same time. Yeah, please this next slide. Yeah, so the question will be here, is there a future sustainable pathway for the energy sector of Algeria? With my research, what I have developed so far, especially when it comes to literature, I have found out that the most of the research that they have developed so far, the majority of them were most showing the potential of renewable energy, technical experiments, also discussing the resources that we have, whether for renewable energy or other resources. But there is a huge gap when it comes to making a policy towards the transition or the transformation to adopt more renewable energy. So that's why within my research, the aim here is to use an economic, institutional perspective to develop a strategy that will fit Algeria as a fossil fuel-based economy towards the adaptation of renewable energy. Yeah, please, the next slide. So yeah, so as a conclusion, my research will contribute none less to the adaptation of renewable energy, plus for that, it will also contribute toward the realization of sustainable development goals, which already Algeria has make a point, and also it's taking a part of this agreement, international agreement. And also plus of that, the research will show the case of a fossil fuel-based economy country such as Algeria will be as a case study for other countries to take it as an example toward the renewable energy transformation perspectives. Yeah, so this was my brief presentation about my country. So I will give you the floor, Paula, to the next.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to move to our next panelist, but we will stay in the same country. And this is intentional for one reason, because when we're talking about transitions, we talk about two fundamental topics. That's something also Tragics has been trying to incorporate in general. And one is this beautiful part of renewable energy. So how do we increase and increase and increase the access to electricity and the access to renewable energy? This is innovation. We need a lot of innovation to get that done in all countries. However, there is another side of the same coin of this transition, which is how do we get rid of the system that is already in place? How do we get rid of the fossil fuel industry, which is quite powerful, not only in terms of energy, but in terms of economic contributions. And that's what we call exnovation. So we also need both forces interacting at the same place. We need innovation for renewable energies adoption, but we also need exnovation. And that's why our next panelist, Imane Bukhatem, I hope I said that correctly, but you can correct me, of course, is joining us actually from Algeria, and she's going to present the same case study, but with a slightly different focus, which is you mentioned hydrogen, and hydrogen is actually important, but you mentioned green hydrogen, and Iman is going to tell us a little bit more about what does this mean, or what could this mean for Algeria and for, in general, fossil fuel dependent countries. So without further ado, please, Imani, you can start your presentation. You can tell me next when you want me to change the slide, and I hope the sound works. So when Imani starts speaking, I would appreciate if participants could again give a thumbs up if you can hear her. Thank you. You're muted. You're muted.
Thanks, Paula. Thank you, Khadija, for presenting for your presentation. And to continue with the topic, I will try to present the other side of the picture of Algeria. So as next, as Khadija has explained, Algeria is a country rich with oil and gas, and our economy depends on it, but we are also a reliable gas exporter. And we rank third after Russia and Norway. However, in response to the Ukraine crisis, Algeria offered to increase its gas export to Europe as a form of support to the continent. For instance, a contract was signed by Sonatrach, the national oil and gas company, and the Italian Eni to pump additional 9 billion cubic meters of gas in the next 2 years. So, so it's not that it is good that we are towards the transition, but there are some geopolitics that affect the path of transition. And this gas export expansion has some risks. So next. So next, Paula, please. So in this particular moment, Algeria current gas reserves cannot meet the European demand during this conflict. And there are many pressures on the government to develop and export unconventional gas, or at the very least, drill more gas, so new gas wells. So 2 further new gas sites were explored in Algeria, and there is a lot of work towards drilling more gas wells, which is not good for the transition and for the overall reduction of CO2 emissions. However, the European Union is preparing to become carbon neutral by 2050, and this gas demand will not last long. Thus, if the country invests in a new oil and gas discoveries to meet and expand gas demand from Europe, there is a significant risk of lock-in and of stranded assets. And to continue with green hydrogen and what my colleague Khadija has explained about the renewable energy plans. Recently, the Ministry of Energy Transition was dismissed, so it doesn't exist anymore, and the renewables are assigned to the Ministry of Renewable Energies, which is a bit disappointing event. So going further to the green hydrogen industry, so we have plans in the country to develop green hydrogen. Next, Paola, please. But it is very uncertain if this hydrogen will be really green, if it is good to the economy, if it is good to the transition, since our renewable energy capacity is very limited, as you have seen in the energy mix. If we dedicate new renewable energy capacity, why would we deprive our people from clean energy sources and use it to produce and export hydrogen? And as we have a problem of water, and like many countries in just like many countries in Africa, so water is a really scarce resource. So should we dedicate it to produce green hydrogen? And the green hydrogen industry is very early stage and very immature technology and capital intensive. We don't have enough expertise, and there is a question whether we'll dedicate the gas infrastructure to export hydrogen, because the renovation is too expensive, and we will still need this infrastructure to export gas. So there is really big questions around the production and the export of green hydrogen from Algeria. So as a conclusion, next please, Paula, I would say that the current opportunity that the oil and gas prices offer is a good moment to commit significant funding for Algeria's renewable energy deployment and to the energy transition. But looking further ahead, exporting green hydrogen or maybe other renewable energies could allow the country to maintain its position as reliable energy exporter in the post-hydrocarbon age. However, this scenario will only be valid if renewables become with a much bigger portion of the country's energy mix. Otherwise, the growth of infrastructure exclusively dedicated to produce hydrogen for export purposes will impede the country's transformation, exacerbate the energy problems, and perpetuate the subordinate position within the global economy. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Imane. I'm not sure you could hear that, but people were clapping here. So yeah, as you see, there's two sides. On the one hand, in the innovation side, a lot of opportunities and a huge potential for renewable energies. But as Imane had just presented, also huge risk of those renewable energies going to contribute or perpetuate a model that is basically extracting resources, at the moment gas, but in the future maybe sun and land and water, to export energy to cover the energy needs of European countries and other countries. And I would say that's not a case exclusive for Algeria, but having these two perspectives, I guess, helps us understanding a little bit the dilemmas of the energy transition in some African countries. And now it's time to move a little bit down south and go from the north of Africa to South Africa, which also has some innovation problems. In this case, it's not the gas sector, but the coal sector. And for that, I have the best panelists I could imagine introducing to you, which is Professor Harold van Blotnet from the University of Cape Town, who is physically here with us in Berlin, but usually leading in the University of Cape Town, the Energy Research Group, working on several topics related to not only coal, but all the minerals of the transition. So I'm very happy to give the floor to you, Harold, so that you can give us your input statement about the challenges of heavily coal-dependent countries in Africa.
Thank you very much, Paola. Just as we start, I want to also greet the French participants in this symposium. Bonjour, c'est mon plaisir d'avoir aussi des gens des pays francophones. Si vous voulez suivre, aujourd'hui, il y a une traduction simultanée, c'est ça? Okay. Yeah, because on the continent, Francophone and Anglophone countries make up the majority. We also have other colonial legacies in the Lusophone countries and a little bit of Spanish. Right, so let me get into the South. It's interesting that you're starting with the North and the South of the continent, where in terms of energy and the SDGs, indeed, SDG 7 is to a large extent met. I think for South Africa, not quite as far as for Algeria. In terms of electricity access, we would be standing somewhere around 90%. And the deep rural areas are difficult, but you'd find alternatives to being on the grid if you need to charge a cell phone or have an LED light in your house. These things are now technically and financially quite achievable. Household thermal remains a very big problem for the large poor population in the country. So you may well be electrically connected, but not have a sustainable thermal solution. And so indoor air pollution from coal and wood burning is a major health issue still in South Africa. But if we can go to my first slide, I'm really speaking from the perspective of heavily coal-dependent countries, and within Africa, that's very few. So South Africa is a very heavily coal-dependent economy. And I decided to put a few stats here because there are snapshots and there are trends. And if we talk about these things, we need to also make sure we capture the trends. So in terms of electricity, 82% is currently generated from coal. That was 95% a decade ago. We are on about 6% from renewables. And also in terms of maybe burning coal, if I take the exnovation thing right up front, we're doing very well actually on forgetting how to burn coal because we can't meet all our electricity demand at the moment. And those of our participants who are from South Africa, I'm so glad I haven't had to live through another 2 weeks of stage 6 load shedding. But I'll be with you on Monday again when I'm home. And yes, it is actually, it weighs you down when 2 times or 3 times a day for 2 hours your electricity is off. But that's yeah, because we have forgotten how to fix and burn, fix plant that burns coal. Right. uniquely in the world, we make liquid fuels from coal, and Caitlin from our group has just redone the numbers, and we've just put out a paper under the climate transparency banner to show it's at 24%. And so that then kind of adds up with electricity that in terms of primary energy, we're at about 2/3 still from coal, and also 2/3 of our climate burden comes directly linked to coal. And so SDG 13 is really what I'm focusing on in my input here. We, in addition to being domestically very dependent on coal, we also earn 6% of our export income on average from coal sales, and we're the 5th largest coal exporting nation, 7th largest coal producing nation. And so in terms of a just transition, the focus is very much on the 90,000 or so people who are employed in the coal value chain. But one also has to say, in terms of justice, these 90,000 people and a couple million more who live around them are subject to what is called toxic air in a High Court judgment of this year. So it's not just about the jobs of 90,000 people, it's also about all the children who have childhood asthma in the immediate communities there. Right, so let's go to my next slide. This really just shows the South African energy value chain. This was made by one of our students, Josie, who may be on the call. Very well done. This is the first time we've got a complete picture since 1994 of what our energy system looks like. The first one then was hand-drawn by somebody called Hilton Trollope, who's currently an honorary research associate with our group and who's working on the question of using hydrogen for steel making and to shut down blast furnaces in Europe and to reduce iron ore in South Africa with hydrogen. So he's still there after many, many years in the case of Hilton. And this picture then really just also shows for you on the coal, which is the gray stuff on top, how it splits into exports in mass flows, how it splits into liquid fuels. There's a second one going through and joins the liquid fuels that are imported and refined domestically, and then the electricity bit. And it just reminds me also on just how inefficient the fossil industry really is, because one of the big moves to renewable energy is that all these flows will get smaller in terms of energy flows, because electrification is just so much more efficient in meeting energy demand than burning fuels. Right, enough said on this one. I could spend a long time on it. The next slide, Paola. So the just transition, very interesting to hear. You had a ministry and that's been shut down in Algeria, if I heard that correctly from Imane. But we've taken a slightly different approach in South Africa in that a presidential climate change commission was established late last year, and their first major piece of work was it early last year already, because their first major piece of work was to make a critical input into our NDC update. But the next big piece of work was to work up a framework for a just transition in the energy sector. And that framework was co-produced with many actors from civil society, and it has now been adopted by Cabinet as official policy about 2 weeks ago. So that's very promising that there's things happening. It's not supported by everyone, or maybe it's kind of supported in principle, but there's still a lot of fighting as to whether we're going to go left or right in terms of getting to where we want to be. Next slide, please. And yeah, I'm going to close this with listing just a whole number of opportunities and challenges around discussing a transition and a just transition in the energy sector. And I could speak to these at length, but maybe we can pick some of these up in the question time or in the later on. So I really just want to pick out one theme, and that there is a huge legacy of mining and bad mining from the coal areas, but also from other mining. And this ties into the land question, which is South Africa's biggest political hot potato, and a matter of unfinished business from an unjust past. And so restoring coal mining lands in a way that could help people to regain access to lands from which their ancestors were or forcibly removed would to many seem to be one of the biggest grand challenges for a just transition in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haro. Yeah, I think you summarized very well what the situation is, and I think you stress out so importantly how in South Africa coal is not only used for the electricity sector, but it's really a major energy carrier. That's the same case in Algeria with gas, which is being used for cooking everywhere in the country. So sometimes we think this transition very much from the electricity sector perspective, but it actually it's a whole energy system issue that has a lot of complications once you start going down the trail where energy is produced and how it's used. And thank you very much for bringing that additional topic to the panel. Nathan, are you still there? Yes, great. So the last input statement, thanks to the wonders of the internet and a hybrid event, we can travel very much quickly across Africa. Now moving to West Africa, and we'll have an input statement by Nathan. I will ask the audience again to give a thumbs up if you can hear him well when he starts speaking. Nathan works as a consultant and expert on renewable energies, and he will present us a little bit, very short, the transition challenge for Ghana. I think I need to stop sharing my screen so that he can start sharing his. Just a second.
I think mine should be sharing. I don't know if you can see that. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, great. Paula, can I progress?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right, so as Paula indicated, the issues for energy transition, we call it in our research group, we try to use the word transformation more because it reflects some form of an entire systemic change that is not limited to just a particular sector and moving from a point A to, say, the point B. So we look at the issues from the policy perspective and all that, but what about the consumer side? Often it's very interesting for us to pay critical attention to what a consumer can also do when it comes to this just energy transition process. So someone will wonder why we should be interested in issues about consumer behavior in the process and all that. But then we can summarize the key relevances of looking at consumer perspectives in the whole transformational discourse to extend beyond the fact that it is only when we can understand the behavior of people who are going to be at the receiving end of the technologies that we are proposing. It is only when we can understand their behavior that we can make accurate predictions in terms of our transition plans and transformational plans and all that. Because if interventions often take more of a bottom-up perspective, evidence shows that the rate of successes are often higher than when we stimulate a system change from just top-down processes. Then it is only when we understand the behavior of consumers within the transformational process that we will be able to understand what best incentive measures to use to help them take up these cleaner technologies that we are proposing. So South Africa, Algeria, wherever you are, if your intention is to reduce, say, greenhouse gas emissions, and then you want to promote the use of renewables, a lot has to do with behavioral change. Because regardless of how robust your policy is, if it's not responsive to the attributes of the target consumers, it becomes difficult for the policies to be effective. And then we can also see that we roll out a lot of interventions. Different school of thoughts bring out policies, some adopt different models. But when you implement any model or intervention within a given context, that model has some form of network effects on the individual household, on the behavior of the entire market structure in terms of demand and supply, prices, and things of the systems and all that. So this is why we should understand what the consumer thinks about all this. And then let's take a quick look at what the context in Ghana is like. I try my best to summarize the Ghanaian situation a little bit. So it's not very comprehensive, but the main challenges we can see in a country that has a national electricity access rates on the average around 2020. The statistics suggest that we stand around above 80% on the average, though urban access rate is higher than the rural areas, and that's consistent with most sub-Saharan African countries. But then it's interesting to note that we have significant solar potentials, but the adoption rates of these solar technologies is often low. And then policies that governments and people roll out are not often responsive to the behavior of the households or people that we want to transform their behavior. So some research gaps exist. Two main gaps that I have identified, which is motivating my study area within the just energy transition discourses. The first, we do not sufficiently understand the micro level determinants of the adoption behavior among the people. And the second is because we do not understand the micro level determinants sufficiently, we make policy propositions, we bring in models, transformative models, but these models are not evidence-based and do not stimulate the changes that we want to see the way we want to see them. So I developed a framework to guide my study. And then in this framework, you can see that if we want to transform the household, I'm not able to use a pointer, so we'll manage, I think, let me try. Yeah, but if we want to, can you see my pointer? Yeah, so on the first side of the framework, we try to make some deductive reasoning about what households, or let's say, are likely to do when we bring out a particular model. So we hypothesize on the adoption behavior. Okay, roll out a capital subsidy scheme. Let us finance 20% of the total cost of the solar PV system. Then households will take it. But these are hypothetical statements that we make based on some theories that we think are very relevant today. But then, after you do your hypothesis, you realize that the issue now takes two sides. It is not only the behavior of the household that you need to understand. You also need to understand the institutional economic issues surrounding the transformational process. So in Ghana, for example, we implemented a capital subsidy model in 2016, and a scheme that was called the National Rooftop Solar PV Program. That has been I think, the largest attempt or effort to transform household behavior, and particularly within the urban context. Other interventions have been in the form of micro-level assistance given to off-grid communities and all that. But then if we have such a wide access rate in the urban areas, we should extensively understand the environmental factors and how this react with the behavioral issues surrounding the households. Then we can make very inductive propositions that will help us to put together the knowledge we gain from the institutional economic aspect and then from other large-scale surveys like econometric models and all that, which is my focus. I am taking a keen interest in the predictor aspects of this. So then we can make very useful models that will help us to get the target system change that we plan to get. We did a preliminary study, and in our study, you can see that when you take a look at Ghana, regardless of where you are, whether you're in the northern belt, the middle belt, or the southern belt, we are taking these three cities, Tamale, Kumasi, and Accra, for the rest of the next 2-3 years. The work group is focusing on these three cities, sorry. We want to see the dynamics across the three cities, and we believe that if we do that, we can have a comprehensive view of the entire Ghanaian case. Our preliminary model that we ran in the very last survey we did for about just 596 households. We are extending the scope in November. We are extending the scope to 1,500 households, and we are taking new forms of analysis. But you can see that out of the different variables that can stimulate change within the system for the just transformation, awareness about the existence of, first of all, the model that is being proposed, its benefits, and what are the cost implications, under which conditions will I be able to acquire the systems, how long will it last, what will be the benefit. Those kind of, that form of awareness is the most significant influencing factor or driver in understanding the behavior of the consumer. Other variables were observed, of course, but just for you to understand how interesting the situation is, it is interesting for us to realize at the end of our survey that even though awareness happens to be the largest driver, it is very low across the 3 cities that we are talking about. Everybody wants to talk about transition, but people even don't understand why they should move. Why the grid supplies me electricity? Why do I need to move? The level of the prevalence of awareness and all this is even very limited. So as a way of outlook, before I end this talk, we are in the next couple of months taking data to do more behavioral analysis that help us to understand 2 key issues. The first one is we want to understand how individual attribute variations based on socio-economically segregated data across the population in the 3 cities that I have mentioned, how differently these variables behave under different interaction conditions. And then we want to introduce a spatial aspect where we look at the spatial characteristics within which these households are located in terms of distance from the from certain like variables. We want to see how the spatial characteristics differently influence the behavior or the likelihood or willingness of people to take up these technologies, either under stated preference conditions or revealed preference conditions in some form of conjoint analysis and other. And then we take the next step where we look at the network effects of the models. For example, we are looking at the capital subsidy model, which currently we can say has failed and there is no proper replacement for it yet. But what are the network effects of this model, like the capital subsidy models, on the technology market and on capacities towards accelerating adoption? So this is what we are looking at, and we believe that if we comprehensively understand these issues, then we can propose very sound interventions in terms of models. It could be in Bangladesh, they have very interesting models that is causing Bangladesh to do very well in terms of energy transition. But what can we do in the sub-Saharan African context? If we extensively understand these things, then as an output in the next couple of years before we finish this program, we will have a very comprehensive model that we can suggest as an input for influencing behavior in the just energy transition process. So thank you very much. And then this is what I have for you from the consumer side of the situation. All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll share my screen in a second when I fix this. But first, thank you, Nathan, for reminding us, even though it seems obvious, that the transition has to bring people in. It cannot be sort of an imposed transition if people are not even understanding what are the benefits of those transition, and that we as academics need to make sure that we don't just have models that are optimizing the cost of everything and expect people to suddenly accept it, but that actually understanding how people behave and explaining why the transition is important is a key part of a just transition. So thank you for that. And now going back to where we started in this discussion, thank you everyone for their for your input statements. They're very different, but I want to bring all of that together back. We're trying to look at an African perspective, right? What are the challenges of Africa as a continent to move to this transition? You have the perspectives of very different countries, but I'm going to to throw two questions that I think are common in the context, of the world, but in particular developing countries, and most African countries are developing countries. And one of them, and I guess the first question will go to our speakers talking about renewable energies, and it's it's the context of this economic global crisis that we're living after the COVID pandemic. It particularly hit developing countries very hard and their economies. And there is, as in any other economic crisis in the world, and scarcity of capital and investment in renewable energies. In this massive transformation, it will require massive investments in infrastructure, massive investments in renewable energy, and this within the context of an actually global economic crisis can bring some challenges. So my question to the two of you will be, how is this affecting the perspectives? How is the new global economic depression situation affecting the perspectives of a transition in your countries, in your particular countries? And then that's on the innovations. That going to my other two speakers, which I guess focused on the sectors we want to get rid of. On the innovation side, we are also in a sort of commodity super cycle where fossil fuel prices at the moment are very high, both for coal and for gas. And that was not the case 2 years ago. And I wanted to ask you directly, and I give the question already so that you can reflect on it. How has this new reality of high fossil fuel prices influence either positively or negatively the transition perspectives for your countries? I think you gave us some clues already, but yeah, so those are the questions. I guess I'm gonna let you start first, and then we'll rotate across the room while I fix the screen problem.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Well, if I understand well, the question that you have asked is that how the global pandemic affect the development of the adoption of renewable energy in the context of Algeria as a case study. Well, to give you a real state about the recent update about what we have in Algeria so far. After the pandemic, the government decided to go further development with regards to the renewable energy, because they figure out that the prices have been dropped of fossil fuels during the pandemic, and Algeria, its economy, it's more basically on depending on, like, the whole incomes come from fossil fuels. So now the government decided to shift away toward the adoption of renewable energy for the let us say for the local people or citizens, and then use that fossil fuels and export it to other countries. So that will make more money for the country, whether for the local citizens, they will benefit from the renewable energy resources or potential that we have already. Apart from that, globally, what I have remarked so far is that renewable energy during the pandemic has been developed so far. Before the pandemic, the share of renewable energy globally was not that much as we have now. So we can see a lot of benefits with, like in international context. Another perspective also is that there are some countries who are using, for example, like Bangladesh as a case study, they are using the perspective of micro credits to develop the renewable energy technology within their country. So money has been never that much issue that will stop us from developing or adopting this technology. It's all about bringing a solution that will fit the context of the country that we're working on. So Bangladesh is a poor country, as we all know, but they established a solution that will work within their context. So as a policy or as a planner, the key thing that we need to think about, or as a researcher also, is that if we decided to bring a solution, we need to be more critical about that solution that will fit the case study that we're working on, not to be more generalized or just bring something that maybe we take an example of another country, but that will not maybe fit that country and the other country, because they have also other challenges, or they have other things that we need to take it in consideration. So this is for the first question. The second one, okay. Okay.
Thank you. I'll stay to the on the first question about this global economic crisis and the different priorities and how that affects the energy transition, and give the floor to Nathan. Are you still with us? And can you hear us?
Yes,
And,
I'm still here.
yeah, great. Maybe can you share with us your thoughts about how this has affected the prospects for the energy transition in Ghana?
All right. So first of all, let me say that my country became a commercial oil producer just not too long ago. But then you can see that the contribution of the sector to other forms of socioeconomic development is the driving factor behind keen interest in continuing investing in the sector. But as Khadija stated up, she mentioned a clue that in as much as governments are not moving away from accelerating investment in fossils, the trend seems to be, let us continue producing, but for the international market. And then let us see if we can find strategies to decarbonize our economies by increasing investment in the renewables or in the clean technologies. And then the funny thing you can realize is that I think my country has, when it comes to renewable energy technology development, we have not really seen any significant impact of the pandemic on policy change or policy direction. The incentives have been to, the incentives that government implemented within the period were more in the form of short-term fix. Let us assist households to alleviate the immediate cost burden, but as to how to rather stimulate behavior. So I was telling you, since 2019 till now, there hasn't been any significant policy initiative as a form of a major priority. We are doing a lot of things with GIZ and all that, but it is unclear what exact, you've tried a model, okay, and then the model failed. Pandemic has shown that, yeah, energy is a critical issue and we need to take a good look at sustainable solutions. But what exactly are you doing? That is not very clear in my context at the moment. You can see that it was just a couple of days ago, my energy minister was in the US, and then he was talking significantly about our oil reserves and still trying to attract a lot of investment and all that. So you can see that the fossil interest is still there. I have no idea when and how the transition is actually going to be very significant, because we keep investing in renewables, but in truth, we are not shying away from drawing more attention to the fossil also. We can write the papers and say that this is the case, but in reality, most of our economies are depending on the revenue from the fossils, and it's becoming difficult for governments to actually say we are moving away. For example, we talk about current energy crisis and deficits being anticipated in the European Union region, but then other countries now see it as an opportunity to accelerate their investment in the fossils, to now open up new markets. So if you produce and you are not getting the market, then that means that what? Domestic consumption has to be factored in and all that. So it's quite unclear what exactly our priorities is for the global context and discussion of climate change. Let us end disease, let us promote renewables. Massive, everyone is talking about it. But when you come down to policy priorities, it looks like we are holding renewables in our hand and throwing it in front, and then we are holding the fossils in our other hand and hiding it behind us. That seems to be the picture that I can see regarding the economists and even with the Ghanaian context. Yeah, so that's my submission on the question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I'll try to, I mean, you made very good and different points, but I'll try to summarize it with a trend that my research is not on Africa, I'm Colombian, my research focuses in Colombia, but something that we also see sort of emerging, which is indeed a commitment to the national transition to a certain extent, increasing renewables and so on and so forth. But at the same time, this addiction to the fossil fuel exports and sort of portraying this as the way to, the means to finance the transition. So we need to export more fossil fuels to be able to finance this transition. This seems to be the case. And with that, I'm going to precisely give over to Mane. I'll repeat the second question I made. So how has this whole energy and global economic crisis affected the perspectives for innovation in the transition in your countries? But now let's go to the ex-innovation side. Imane, the global crisis, economic, but also in particular this recent European crisis with Russia and gas, for a gas country like Algeria. How has it changed the perspectives for the energy transition in your country?
Thank you, Paola, for the question. I see, like, as the global response or the European response to the crisis has maybe shifted the political or proved some political energy perspectives also in developing countries. Like in Algeria or in Africa, reducing greenhouse gas emissions is not prioritized over the socio-economic development, because maybe we don't see our countries as historically responsible of polluting the planet as much as industrialized countries have done. And after the Russian invasion, we have seen how that really fossil fuels matter as maybe in geopolitics. And we have seen maybe a response from countries like reopening coal plants or going further for nuclear, which has impeded maybe or discouraged our policymakers to maybe go for renewables, because there is an international call for energy transformation and for energy transition, but maybe the recent changes has impeded the pace of the transition, not only in developing countries but also globally. So we have seen that there is a call for investments in gas and more courage and more political will to dig more gas wells, and why not go for using unconventional resources, and especially for gas, which is maybe something that is different than coal, that it is being marketed as the clean fuel, and it is not that harming to the planet, which makes the problem with gas even more complicated. So the recent geopolitical conflict in Ukraine has really impeded the transition in Algeria and in global South countries.
Thank you, Imane. Indeed, for a gas exporting country like Algeria, it's not good news. If for gas phase out, that the European Union is now demanding more gas. So thank you for this. We'll go back to a couple of points that you made, but I'm gonna hand it over to Haro to also answer the same question. How has this new high prices, global energy situation affected the perspectives for the transition in South Africa?
Thank you very much. So as I pointed out in my opening expose, South Africa uses coal both domestically and derives export income from that. Sure, high coal prices mean that we're getting a good extra bit of cash into the coffers right now, and this is really helping to fill some gaps that the pandemic opened up. So you know the extra income to the government is very welcome. Whether that strengthens the coal exporting industry in the long run or not, I think it's too early to really say. I wouldn't worry too much over that. I think people who analyze the coal industry more seriously would know that this is an upset and it won't last. I do want to very briefly just comment on what else happened with the crisis in the country. It's actually not affecting us in nearly the same way as many others. I would say the high fuel prices, because we import most of our liquid fuels, only a quarter we make ourselves. Those have been very annoying to the car owning 20% of the population who just moan and then pay the high price and still drive. They've been harder for the poorer part of the population that rides in public transport, which means minibus taxis running on diesel or on petrol, actually gasoline. So the extra fares have hit budgets. We do import some of our wheat, but the staple food maize is grown domestically. Higher fertilizer costs only partly, again, we partially manufacture. So I'll have to see. It's not been a big crisis in that sense. I haven't heard of major concerns of food price inflation, for example, at this point. What we have seen, and I want to sort of revert to the geopolitics, is that the input costs for renewable energy have gone up, and to a point where the latest bid round for large-scale renewables is now largely stalled. Only 3 of the 15 companies that bid a year ago have now signed, and they're 3 wind-based manufacturers. The solar guys all can't meet their commitments because of the higher cost of solar than a year ago. About 30% higher, we hear, and I'm just wondering to what extent that's an effect of loads and loads of Germans deciding to buy solar to put on their balcony and driving up the international price, or whether there's something more strategic geopolitical happening here. The China-Russia alliance is being talked about in the West, but by just scaling back a little bit the production capabilities under some pretense of solar producers in China, where 90% of world solar panels come from, China can exert some hidden pressure onto the global energy markets as well. And I just want to ask researchers here to pay attention to that. And especially in the West, you have a particular narrative around this conflict as a Russian war of aggression, and that narrative's very strongly brought out here all the time. And we see these things slightly differently. There's much critique of Western hegemony. The role of the United States in European affairs over a long time need to be understood a little bit more critically. And much of the European energy crisis has undoubtedly to have something to do with US interests in the gas markets too. So I'm just going to, and I want to, if I may, still sort of pick up this theme on African elites, government elites, fascination with oil and oil exports. There's about a dozen African countries still wanting to develop more oil exporting capacity. This is a big worry. And I want to cite the Nigerian playwright and author Wole Soyinka on this matter. He once put up a play in a Nigerian version of Ubu Roi, and he has this very funny scene in it where Ubu Roi is elevated to become a minister, and later on he does the putsch and becomes president or dictator. But his first ministerial post is he becomes Minister of Agriculture, and he comes home and his wife shouts at him and says, "Who wants to be the Minister of Goats and Cows? You should become the Minister of Oil."
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we still have 15 minutes, and I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a laughing face in the audience. I'm not sure everyone was looking at the chat, so you have the possibility to add your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to answer them here. But since anybody has added questions so far, I'm gonna continue, and I'm gonna pick up on a topic that was slightly mentioned, I think, by Iman, but it's very related to this exports dependency, which is hydrogen and green hydrogen. And this is sort of a big topic now in Europe, saying we will need hydrogen, we will need green hydrogen, and countries with a lot of solar potential, including Morocco, Algeria, many other African countries, they could be in a position to do these exports, and this new big industry, maybe the new oil or something like this, that's gonna develop. But that's not only related to hydrogen. Actually, there are a lot of minerals, and a lot of those minerals that are critical for this transition, they are concentrated in Africa. So many African countries are very rich in those minerals of the transition. I know UCT has a lot of research on this, because South Africa itself is exporting a lot of those minerals for the transition. Um, yeah. Um, so so it seems to be, on the one hand, depending on how you look at it, an opportunity to Africa. This global energy transition seems to be an opportunity for new export markets, and it seems to be maybe something that countries could look forward to. However, the experience with resources exports until now, including oil and gas, has not been very positive for the development of African countries. They're still lagging behind in a lot of sustainable development goals, and these sort of big export industries, they have not directly translated to benefits for a lot of the people, and that's because of different circumstances I'm not going to touch upon. But this is just to ask you then, how do you see this perspective of Africa becoming exporter of critical transition resources? They require, as Imane was shortly mentioning, water, they require land, and in some cases they could have some environmental impacts. Do you see more opportunities or more risk for your specific countries when it comes to this global transition and the role they can play as exporters? And maybe I start backwards now and start with Haro, and then go back in the round.
Yeah, Paola, these are important questions looking forward. I think one point to keep in mind right up front is whatever you export, if you're exporting resources, you are adopting a colonial era mindset that their riches are in the ground and you need to find them and then turn them into cash. That is called natural capital liquidation. So it's slightly different when you're harvesting a renewable resource sustainably, and you can keep doing that indefinitely. It's quite difficult when you do that on biomass because you can wreck the soil, but when you're sort of tapping into renewable energies as your model, then you at least don't run the risk of liquidation of the capital, but you're still not investing into human and social capital necessarily. So you need to have and this is shown very well in the resource curse literature. If you're going to have a resources dependent economic system, then the quality of your governance systems is much more important than if you have any other economic kind of development system in mind. So yeah, let me say that up front. So it is possible to develop on the back of resources, but you need to pay a huge amount of attention to the quality of your social capital and the governance infrastructure and so on. Hydrogen is something that could offer continued export earnings or income as coal goes down. So don't take it away from us. In fact, offer us a partnership because it's for the global climate. This is a good thing. And thank you. The Just Energy Transition Partnership is trying to do that. Its finance reach isn't going to go as far as hydrogen as yet because the grid strengthening to build up the renewables must come first, rightly so. But we can talk about a second part of that partnership if we get the first part right. And then on the minerals, yeah, again, you really need to understand the nuances. And I'll just say that once, not so long ago, I did a paper with a Congolese refugee who had to leave the DRC, the eastern part, at the age of 19 in the big Congolese war that killed probably 2 million people around around 2000. And we did a paper on the differences between cobalt mining and coltan mining in the DRC. To you, they might sound like co, and they come from this country in the middle of the continent. If you want to know the differences, they are huge, and the one could help alleviate the conflict that is associated with the other. Both of them play a very big role in renewable energy. So don't just because it sounds like Co and Congo say it's bad, child labor, don't buy it. It's much more complex than that. Thank you.
Okay, we're going back. So the next one will be, Iman, are you still there? Because your camera is now off. I'm not sure you're still there. And do you want to answer this question about if you see more risk or more opportunities?
I think that at least in my opinion or from my from Algerian experience, exporting raw materials or resources in their raw state is not that good to the economy. But instead investing it in adding value added and exporting a more valuable product, not at its raw state, like to avoid extractivism, to avoid attracting investors looking for cheap resources and cheap I don't know, workers. So it is important that we collaborate to reduce the greenhouse emissions, but we should look at it very carefully. We should address all the sustainability criteria of the value chain to make sure that the global south is not just a source of raw materials and cheap labor, but it is instead it will allow them to develop socio-economically and to install industrial infrastructure, to exchange knowledge and to develop the country further ahead. on more collaborative package, and when we can get also the technology, knowledge, and develop the whole continent in a better way.
Thank you.
Right.
Nathan, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you want to give your take on the risk and opportunities? Do you see more for Ghana as a risk or as an opportunity?
All right. So I think it's a two-way. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. I see this as a two-way action. First of all, who controls the international market? That's the first question. Who controls prices? Now, there are systemic structures in place that keep, should I say, it's like systemic structures that are in place to ensure that this is, let me say, a huge macroeconomic issue, but I think the issues are more systemic. It's one thing saying that, okay, we want to leverage on this as an opportunity to probably rather focus on domestic value addition and all that. But then at the end of the day, is our domestic market, first of all, ready? And then second of all, enough to sustain or to even consume if we produce? Are we able to consume it domestically? That is one. Because once you cannot, then you have to think about what global market and exportation. Then the question then I keep asking myself is, who controls the market? Then the economists will tell you it's forces of demand and supply and all that. But then when you go into the real life situation, you realize that it's beyond forces of demand and supply. It's like there are some systemic structures. And until these systemic structures are dealt with, it becomes difficult to even say that we are leveraging on this as an opportunity. So I think that just as Professor was making a point some few minutes ago, it is important for us to, the whole thing has to do with reorganization of our mind, rethinking our priorities, and then reassessing what exactly we want to do. Because even if we domesticate and then we are not able to use anything for first of all, we are not able to buy at the right prices domestically. Second of all, we are not able to reinvest whatever income we are getting from this sustainably. Then it doesn't make sense to even think about that. Secondly, if we are sending everything out and then we are making very good use of the income that is coming from it. So it's more like I am very careful when making submissions on this because it's more systemic, has political aspects and dimensions, and it's not entirely a socio-technical issue. So when it comes to some of these issues, I try to be very conservative with words. And then, yeah, so that would be it for now. Okay.
Thank you, Nathan. Our last panelist, do you see more risk or opportunities?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think it's important here to just refer to the title of our session today, which is Socio-ecological transformation. And then we mentioned there just transition in the global south. So here it's, at least from my perspective, it's really important to differentiate between just a transition or transformation, because transition is just to move on from one case to another. However, transformation, it means we will do huge transformation in the whole sector, and that's what we are aiming for. So, for example, if we want to apply, or let us say, the hydrogen technology now on the Algerian context, I would see it. It will be the same business as usual scenario, because we will also our economy will also rely on the same thing that we are doing for the time being as fossil fuels. But the aim here is that we build other economy resources for the country. We also enhance social citizens to accept this kind of technology and start from their side also to adopt it. Also, as Iman has mentioned, is that, and also the professor has said that maybe it's the time also to not rely on Africa, or between brackets, make it just a laboratory of experiments, and there is a new technology, okay, let's go for Africa and try it there, and then if it works, we just install there some pipelines and have it here. But that will be not the case, because if you want to have sustainable development in the whole global, that means we will have let us say equal chances, equal opportunities for the whole countries. At least from my side, like if Algeria will start to invest in hydrogen again, I would see it, we are not that much ready to implement this technology, because as I mentioned in my presentation, only renewable energy, we didn't reach yet 1% of share in the energy mix. I mean, how could come now to start and invest in a new technology that it's super new, even for European countries, for like many countries who have established this technology for now, and they still working on it. It's not yet developed or yet ready to adopt it in other countries who are yet already to develop renewable energy in their local market. So to sum up my answer, I would go for enhancing the energy transformation or sustainable energy transformation, not only transition in those countries who are more focusing on fossil fuels, especially in their economy. So we will try to create, for example, job opportunities in another market and develop it and take it up from there. Yeah, so that would be my submission.
Thank you to all of our panelists. We unfortunately are running out of time. There are no questions in the box, so I think we're gonna conclude here. Even though the discussion was very good, I invite the people that are physically here in Berlin, even though it's late, to continue with the discussion. And obviously there were many takes on this, but I believe something that became quite clear from your interventions is that there are risks and opportunities, and that the solutions that were made up for Europe or whoever else, they cannot, or even for one African country, they cannot apply to all of them. There's quite a lot of research needed on how to actually avoid those risks that we were talking about, how to achieve that innovation, and how to really create that innovation in a way that leads us to a transformation and really a significant improvement of the quality of lives of millions of people in the African continent. And for all of that, I'm just gonna make some advertisement to our Tragic Center. That's the website. Because there's so much research needed on this, I will invite everyone that's listening to us to look into the calls that we will have. We'll have calls for scholarships for master students, for PhD students, and also for research stays in our partner organizations. And I really hope that a lot of those research projects will lead us to coming a bit closer into developing the specific answers that African countries and countries in the global south need to address the challenges of the energy transition. So that's all from our side. At least for the virtual participants, we're gonna say goodbye now. Thank you so much for dialing in. Thank you so much to everyone for listening in and for the patience with the technical inconveniences that we had. We will upload the videos in YouTube and post the link in our social media as soon as they're available, also with the translations to French and to Spanish, so that you can also share with other people that couldn't make it but could be interested in this. That's it. Thank you so much and have a nice day, everyone. Bye bye.
The recording has stopped.